Welcome to The Empire Never Ended. This is Boris and Ray.
Hey.
Fritz is on assignment right now. Collecting valuable information. He'll be back with us shortly.
We did an episode like this before, I think.
We did, yeah. And not too long ago, I feel like. Maybe like a couple months ago. The astute listener might also notice that there wasn't an episode, a Patreon episode last week. That one's kind of my fault. We recorded something for y'all, and, since Fritz was on assignment, I took it upon myself to edit it, which, let me tell you, is a task. And, I suffered a myriad of problems with it and lost my mind and decided to set that one aside for another time. So maybe we'll do something with that. Maybe if not with the recorded material, maybe we can record again an episode with that same topic. We'll see. Yes. And I think it was a fun one, but it'll have to wait because everybody, give a round of applause to Fritz for editing all the time.
For sure, yeah.
It's a fucking pain in the ass, let me tell you.
Or subscribe and become a patron so we have enough money to have an actual editor.
Well, this is a Patreon episode, so...
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, you're, I guess, already subscribed, so...
True.
There we go. As you also notice, Ray's voice is kind of fucked up, so I'll probably be doing... most of the talking today.
It is a bit fucked up. I'm drinking tea. I hope it will get better.
So we won't force you to talk too much if you don't want to.
Okay, I think I'll be fine.
All right, well, let's jump into it now. Today's topic is a little bit of a digression from some stuff that we talked about a few weeks back when Fritz gave us his great overview of Operation Bloodstone and some of the strange, harebrained plots of the CIA to recruit Nazi collaborators and war criminals for the purposes of infiltrating and fighting against communist governments in Eastern Europe. And while we talked about that, we also discussed the CIA's first, let's say, disastrous foray into trying a hands-on overthrow, and that was of Enver Hoxha's regime in Albania.
Yeah.
Giving mention to fascist collaborationist group Bali Kombatar and figures like Jafar Deva, Midat Frasheri, and Hassan Doti. But these, of course, were not the only parties involved. I think we would be remiss not to mention some of the wacky adventures of other Albanian anti-communist exiles that went on during the Cold War. So I guess this isn't going to be some sort of comprehensive view of Albanian exile groups. I'd like to talk more about that in a more serious way at some point. But kind of like a overview or a highlight reel of some of the more interesting and bizarre and wild stories there.
Yeah, for sure we should talk more on this podcast about Albanian nationalists in the future.
Oh, yeah. We definitely will. And depending on how this episode goes, how long it goes, this might actually be like a continuing thing because some of the first stories, the first story that I'm going to talk about might be kind of long. So we'll see.
Yeah, but they have lots of crazy guys. They definitely deserve to be on our podcast.
Yeah, it's also interesting kind of how much Albania falls off the radar for most studies of World War II or the Cold War, especially when talking about nationalist groups like Bali Kombatar.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably part of this like tendency to, at least of Westerners, to kind of exoticize or just like outright other Albanians.
Yeah.
Because they don't really know what to make of a Muslim majority nation in Europe.
Yeah.
And that's also constantly talked about, and it's a lot less important than people in the West tend to think. But I think it's important to talk about them in the way that they kind of saw themselves. Which is as modern nationalist projects.
Yeah.
Like Bali Kombatar had a pretty diverse array of political opinions, one could say, but were
Can you just quickly say what Bali Kombatar is?
Bali Kombatar was an Albanian, or is, I guess there's still some remnants of it today, but was an Albanian nationalist political group that is best known for its involvement in the collaborationist governments of the Italian occupiers and the German occupiers.
Yeah. It means National Front, right?
It means National Front, which tells you kind of where they are. But, they are often characterized as having of being social democratic, having an agrarian wing and this, that, and the other thing. And, I think like a lot of the groups that we talk about on the show, some of that doesn't really matter too much because when you get down to it, there's this, I think as you like to say, pure nationalism that motivates their politics. Mm-hmm. And I think certainly when we're talking about Bali Kombatar, the atrocities that they committed kind of speak for themselves, under the watch of people like Jafar Deva and Hassan Doti, mass killings, expulsions of non-Albanians, forced albanization of Bosniaks in their areas of control, and of course, the Skanderbeg SS division. So, I mean, it
doesn't sound very social democratic.
Yeah, I don't particularly buy that, even though you'll see that a lot, and there's a lot of revisionism specifically around them for some reason. It's pretty weird. Since when we talked about the CIA attempt to overthrow Hoxha, we talked about the Ba'athist forces a little bit, but also there were the loyalists who of the exiled King Zog and his legalist movement. So I think
King Zog was originally a president or a prime minister, right?
Well, I think this is a good place to start is with King Zog. So King Zog the First was born Ahmet Bey Zogoli. He later changed his surname to Zogu to sound more Albanian. He was born in 1895 in Ottoman Albania. He was a child of a feudal landowning family. Went to school in Istanbul. Pretty solid feudal landowning family. Had the money to send him to school. After his schooling, he was active in the early Albanian national awakening and independence movement prior to World War I. After Albanian independence, he gets involved in politics. He serves numerous different government positions, and prime minister, and then was elected as the first president of Albania by their National Assembly in 1925. In 1928, he proclaims himself King of Albania, claiming to be a descendant of medieval Albanian national hero Skanderbeg, and embarks on a number of, let's say, this is the way they saw it, as modernization programs. But his rule kind of looked a lot like that of other Balkan monarchs in that it was pretty much a kleptocracy that just ruled over a massively impoverished and largely peasant nation, similar to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in that way, high literacy rates, especially for women, et cetera, et cetera.
But he was, if I remember correctly, closely tied to the Yugoslav monarchy, right?
Yeah, he did. So when he became prime minister, it was because he was exiled from Albania and was basically reinstated by the Yugoslav army. Albanian and Yugoslav politics and Serbian politics over this time period were pretty complicated and often involve intervention from the Serbian side or the Yugoslav side to install different figures and the like. His rule was very chaotic. I'm not going to get into all of the different, assassination attempts. But let's just say very simply that he faced opposition from both the left and the right, which was kind of more overtly fascist. There was a burgeoning fascist movement in Albania, and he faced opposition from them as well. Although it's interesting that these kind of modern Albanian fascists generally see his rule as favorable because he worked to instill a particular like Albanian identity and kind of Europeanized the country, got rid of some of like the Ottoman legacy. They think he didn't do it enough. But that like ultimately, it was a step in the right direction. It was like a real like nationalist ruler. In 1938, he marries Geraldine Aponi. She has some really long, ridiculous title. She drew a lot of interest from American press for being one of the few European royals of partial American ancestry. So she's half, on her father's side, descended from Austro-Hungarian nobility, and on her mom's side, descended from like Old South Virginian nobility. I guess you can. It is nobility. It's as close as it gets in America. Is like the Virginian planters or whatever.
Aristocracy.
Total aristocracy. And their wedding was a big extravaganza in Albania. Hitler gifted them a Mercedes limousine as a wedding present. Even she was Catholic, he's Muslim. Their wedding was officiated. I think it was a civil wedding, but attended by representatives of the Catholic Church and Muslim clergy as well.
Interesting.
It's not actually forbidden for men to take wives of another religion.
But I think it is forbidden for Catholics to marry Muslims.
It is. And later on, I'll get to some interesting juicy scoop that I got from some CIA reports that hint at, some things. So in 1939, she gives birth to their only heir and son, Leka I. Just days later, despite enjoying a close relationship with fascist Italy throughout his reign, Mussolini invades Italy, annexes Italy, and sets up a puppet state there, and they are forced to flee, one of the many times that they will be relocating. Kind of like what the Yugoslav monarchy would do a few years later. Right before they left, they took all the gold from the reserves. Of course. And pieced out. They spent some time bouncing around Europe and settled in France until the Germans invaded France, at which point they moved to London and lived in London throughout World War II. So then after the war, a few years after the war, I think they also went back to France immediately afterwards. But then by the late 40s, they moved to Egypt, where they were invited by King Farouk I, who, like, I don't know, many people might not know this, but like Egyptian monarchy was largely Albanian.
And the dynasty is of Albanian origin, right?
Yes. I mean, of course, they were mixed up with all kinds of people, but they actually, some of them were kind of proud Albanians, and Farouk I was one of them.
They were basically part of the Ottoman military, and that's how they ended up in Egypt. Right.
And they ruled for quite a long time. I mean, the dynasty ends with Farouk, but I don't know. I've read stuff that he even had like Albanian bodyguards and spoke Albanian and the like. He kept it real. And so that they end up in Egypt. They settle in Alexandria, buy a massive palace, and it's from there that King Zog starts, coordinating his loyalist forces and getting in touch with the CIA and committing his loyalist forces to these disastrous operations. And it should be mentioned, I think we might have said it in the Bloodstone episode, but Bali Kambatar and the monarchy did not get along very well. So it wasn't exactly an easy match for them to make.
But they did cooperate.
They did cooperate, yeah.
This is now the 50s or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were several attempts to infiltrate into Albania. All of them were disastrous. None of them worked. And they went from the late 40s to the very early 50s.
Okay.
So this is the time period that we're talking about now. but I have to mention that I came across this really juicy gossip in declassified CIA documents about King Zog. It's like some true Game of Thrones shit.
Yeah.
So when I was reading through some stuff about King Zog, I found a declassified top secret document from 1949, which was information given by Zog's attorney, who I think was British, but might have been American, Edgar M. Church, who was also the husband of Geraldine's cousin.
Okay.
And in this report, he basically writes to the CIA about what Zog's compound looked like and gives a breakdown of pretty much every single person he met there, saw there at the compound, and then alleges some pretty interesting things, namely that King Zog was banging his sister Sania, and that they brought a half Albanian, half French guy by the name of Count Alexander de Villa to entertain Geraldine. I might even read off part of his report there, because it's pretty funny. I did not meet any of these sisters, and it appears that in accordance with strict Mohammedan custom, they live in another part of the palace in seclusion. I was told by the Queen indirectly, and by her sister Virginia very directly, that Sania has a great influence on Zog indeed. It is quite obvious and apparent that Zog is living with his sister as man and wife, and it may well be that in addition to his official duties, Villa has been imported to entertain Zog's wife.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely is Game of Thrones stuff.
Straight up. Yeah. According to the best information I could obtain, I bent every effort to obtain this information as tactfully as possible. The sisters are only interested in being supported by their brother and obtaining as much money from him as possible. None of them possessed any marked degree of intelligence as far as I could gather. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Then he also goes on to say that that the Queen went to Geraldine, went to Rome and had an audience with the Pope, which he suspects was perhaps an attempt to obtain approval for a divorce. Although he says that, like, if anyone is asking for the divorce, it would be King Zog and not Geraldine.
Yeah.
And that she's better off with Zog than moving to America as a divorcee.
I don't think the Pope would have a problem with her divorcing a Muslim.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Then he also mentioned some other interesting facts. For example, the gold, that they had an entire, this like massive, I guess, Scrooge McDuck chamber with all the riches of Albania that were in these coffers, that when the king and queen weren't present, required guards to physically sit on these treasure chests.
Nice. So surprised they didn't have a dragon there or something.
Yeah, right. This is also where we get mention for the first time of their son, little Leka, who he describes as having an English governess. And he is a blonde, blue-eyed, very precocious, spoiled, and speaks English, French, German, Albanian. Leka is very mature for a boy of 12. Zog seems perfectly willing to risk his life and let his wife and child take care of themselves if he can return to Albania. So this is the first time we hear of little Leka, who will be pretty important to this story later. Yeah,
he's a character.
An insane character. I don't know how more people don't know about this. It's like a filmic story. It's fucking ridiculous. So the family stays in Egypt until the monarchy gets overthrown by Nasser, at which point they pack up all the gold and and move again. Now they went back to France before most of the family settles in Spain under the protection of Franco. Not unusual for Franco at the time. We know that like lots of, for example, Ustashas and the like were living in Spain.
Otto Skorzeny.
Yep, exactly. Unfortunately for King Zog, he wasn't long for this world, and he dies in 1961. Leka is then proclaimed king. He's crowned king in he describes it as as a big ceremony in the news in some newspaper I read. It was like in the hallway of the hospital or something. And so he's crowned, king of Albania in 1961, and Little Leka grew up to be quite the big boy. Literally, almost every single American and British press report about him always emphasizes his height. He's 6 feet 8 inches, which is a little over 2 meters.
Yeah.
So quite a tall guy. Now, by this time, Leka had already studied in British schools, both in Egypt and then in England, and attended the Sandhurst Royal Military Academy and had rank in the British Army, I think second lieutenant, I believe. And would embark on a career that would connect him to just about every major anti-communist government in the Cold War. So according to his own official biography, when he was living in Spain under the protection of Franco, and they all got diplomatic passports, all that kind of stuff, so they were able to travel around, he built a friendship with the Shah of Iran, and his godfather, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who, and I quote, guided him to build a successful career as a commodities broker. Now, these commodities are weapons.
Yes.
Because this dude is this is Lord of War before the story that inspired Lord of War. I mean, and kind of even crazier than that story. So again, according to his official biography, in 1966 and 67, he went on an operational duty as a Taiwanese observer to Vietnam.
Okay.
Later, he traveled to Thailand, and with the support of the Thai army, he recruited Thai and Myanmar soldiers to train Albanian volunteers in guerrilla tactics.
Okay.
Now, it gets even weirder. Thailand would be one of his major bases of operation for about a decade. And he didn't just have Thai soldiers train his volunteers. According to this author, Charles Fenyvesi, he actively recruited Shan Highlanders into his Army of the Council of Liberation of Ethnic Albania.
Wow.
Issuing them all Royal Albanian passports, which are completely useless, right?
Of course.
And I suspect he also issued them other kinds of forged passports because they traveled with him.
Yeah. Do you know who were his Albanian volunteers?
From what I understand, okay, so again, it gets into kind of a little bit of weird Orientalism in some of these articles from the 70s when they talk about him, where they say that he had a loyal cadre of people that were bound by his tribal kinship. From what I can gather, a lot of them came from the former royal guards and these loyalist forces that managed to make it out of Albania or were already in exile. The thing is about Albania, and after these attempts on Hoxha, Hoxha's known to be probably the most paranoid communist leader of all time. Basically, after that, very few people made it out of Albania. Apparently, he had a 6-foot electrified fence on the Yugoslav border. Obviously, leaving was considered, treacherous and whatever, and you get, killed and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's pretty ridiculous that the Yugoslavs and Serbs especially had this myth how Kosovo is being populated by Albanians from Albania the whole time.
Well, Yugoslavia did take in a bunch of Albanians, including fighters, actually. I saw this in actually one of these books about the infiltration, is that the Yugoslav, but again, it wasn't this massive thing.
Yeah.
They did allow some of these anti-Hoxha fighters to stay in Yugoslavia or whatever.
Yeah, no, the Yugoslavs had the idea, like just the general population who was, influenced by nationalism or just prejudice against Albanians, how, hundreds and thousands of them are like crossing the border illegally and settling in Kosovo or something like this, which doesn't make sense. Like, not only because of the Hoxha regime and its paranoia, but also the paranoia of the Yugoslav regime regarding the Albanians and the super, control that was imposed in Kosovo.
Which is, a very well documented thing. It's not quite a controversial subject to talk about. So, Leka's in Thailand recruiting Shan fighters and issuing them passports and teaching them Albanian.
Wow.
Apparently, he said in an interview with this author that he went that far so that he could find people that didn't have conflicting interests. Just pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Although
so he was basically producing Albanians.
Yeah, but again, it's not quite that he just ended up in Thailand doing this stuff. Quite some sources say, and this seems totally reasonable, given some of his statements later, that during this time period he was working with the CIA in Indochina and using his Shan contacts for information and like smuggling of weapons and the like. We're talking about the time period of the Vietnam War here.
Sure.
Apparently, it seems like he fell out of favor with the CIA and the Thai state, probably for his shameless profiteering or commodities brokerage.
Yeah.
Which leads him to eventually get detained in Thailand and kicked out, which he explicitly blames the CIA for. So it seems like he was, a useful CIA asset for some time and then probably ceased to be and probably became more trouble than he was worth, which seems to be kind of a consistent thing in his life.
Yeah, he seems a bit crazy.
Absolutely. So he gets kicked out of Thailand. He's not very happy about it. He goes back to Spain, where I guess simultaneously he was already, he was kind of living between Spain and Thailand. In Spain, he had a rather large compound, which this author, Charles Fenyvesi, describes as looking like a military base with, high barbed wire fences and a bunch of Albanian and Shan guys marching around in Albanian uniforms, armed to the teeth.
Yeah.
So he claims, and I haven't found much information about this elsewhere, that in 1975 he held a congress in Madrid that united different Albanian groups under the slogan "Nation above all." I'm not quite sure what the details of this actually are, because I've only seen this really in his accounts. There's nothing much that, say, the CIA has to say about it, or that I've seen in other, I guess, Albanian nationalist writings. Though my guess is that he probably was able to consolidate whatever contacts he had in Europe. To, as he put it, start a worldwide front against communism.
Yeah.
But again, his luck in Spain was starting to run out as well. With Franco's health ailing, he could no longer do whatever the fuck he wanted anymore, like have this big fucking training compound, while selling massive amounts of weapons and stockpiling huge amounts of weapons. And this is what eventually gets him run out of Spain, because again, the arms dealing thing didn't look very good. What are they going to do?
He was basically stockpiling weapons, probably to liberate Albania or something like that at some point.
Yeah, but also selling weapons in conflicts all around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see now with the next chapter in his life, what direction that goes in as well. So he gets kicked out of yet another country. And where would you, as an anti-communist warlord arms dealer, go in the 1970s? How about Rhodesia?
Yeah, of course.
So the actual details of why he chose Rhodesia vary. In one story that I read, it was that he had contacts with the Moroccan Moroccan royalty and was planning on going to Morocco and then maybe elsewhere. But what it looks like is that he was close friends with the Rhodesian foreign minister, and that he had been to Rhodesia many times. In this one story about him, they put it very mildly, saying studying guerrilla tactics. Leka had visited Rhodesia many times, and also Mozambique.
Yeah. He was studying. Yeah.
Studying. Definitely not, selling weapons. Yeah. In the various anti-colonial conflicts over there. The story gets stranger. Just from on his trip from Spain to Rhodesia, in that his personal plane lands in Gabon to refuel. At which point the Gabonese government under Omar Bongo sends troops to go arrest him. Now, again, accounts of this differ. One account is that he, spent, hours there negotiating a release. The other account is that he came out with an RPG and threatened the soldiers or police or whoever was surrounding him, and was eventually allowed to go because I imagine he had half of this Shan army with him. Whatever.
Shan Albanian army. Yeah.
Shan Albanian army. And it's also not quite clear who was behind trying to get him arrested. In some accounts say that Hoxha was pulling some strings. I don't know what kind of contacts Hoxha had in Africa. Other accounts say it was the USSR. Maybe it was Yugoslavia. Who knows? But it didn't succeed, obviously, and he ends up going to Rhodesia. So, he settles down in Rhodesia. They have a compound, again, by big old compound outside of Harare. And he, in these accounts where they put it very mildly, sent his forces to advise Rhodesian troops. Other accounts say that he committed a bunch of his Albanian Liberation Army guys to go fight in the Rhodesian Bush War, which is going on at this time.
Sure. So, is that the name of his army? Do they have an official name?
I believe it's in some accounts it's the National Liberation Army, just simply. In others, it's this Council for the Liberation of Ethnic Albania.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Which I think we've mentioned it a bunch of times before, but ethnic Albania is this term that is like a nationalist, irredentist term for Greater Albania.
Yeah, Albania is everywhere where Albanians live, in the Balkans, I guess.
Right. But maybe in Rhodesia too, who knows? Because he has his guys fighting there.
I don't know if were they ever interested in south of Italy, because there's Albanians there as well, or Sicily.
I'm not sure. Actually, it's I'd say yes, probably. In some circles, yes, absolutely. Although I've read differing attitudes towards the Arbarash population of Albanians from Italy, who had been there since the Middle Ages or whatever. But yeah, I think it's included, but it's not often. Ethnic Albania traditionally is just in the Balkans without Italy. I think some of them like to get carried away with it. So apparently, at this time, he also asks the Rhodesian president whether he would also commit to liberating Albania, which he politely declines, I guess. But Rhodesia is, again, not long for this world, because by 1979, rebels defeat the white minority government, of course, establish Zimbabwe, and once again, Leka packs his bags and
bags of
weapons,
gold and guns. Yeah.
Gold and guns, and God knows what else.
Probably diamonds or something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, this kind of is the way he dresses, the way he looks, it's very much like he's playing this old like British colonialist like adventurous game. Like he wears those kind of what are they, like canvas suits or whatever? Like, you know what I mean? Like this I was a big fan of Rhodesian camouflage even afterwards. Some of the only information you can find on this, outside of like a few books, are like, you know, the weirdo like Lost Cause white nationalists that are obsessed with Rhodesia. And that like really nerd out about like Rhodesian camo and Rhodesian weapons and like all this fucking shit. So they're like, oh, look at the Albanian forces wearing, you know, the trademark blah 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 camo of Rhodesia.
Jeez. Yeah, Leka is like a Bond villain, something like that.
Yeah, it's not even Bond villains. It's like action villain. You know, like a fucking like old school ass action movie. You know what I mean? Like constantly armed to the teeth. I guess on one of his trips to North America that he took, he was arrested in Canada for having concealed weapons. Like he didn't go anywhere without weapons. And like even on like a lot of his later photographs, he's like brandishing weapons, and you know that's his business. That's his commodity. He sells weapons seemingly all over the world. I should mention also that during, you know, he married a woman from Australia who became his queen, Queen Susan.
Queen Geraldine and Queen Susan.
Yeah, Geraldine and Susan. Typical Albanian names. Really. I have a feeling he had this like Anglophile trait to him. He did go to like Sandhurst and stuff, and sent his son there, who's also named Leka. But his son has yet to be born. So, you know, where does a guy that gets kicked out of Rhodesia go? Naturally, apartheid South Africa.
Of course, yeah.
Where he's granted asylum. And again, sets up his, you know, base of operations for his, you know, liberation army, and presumably continues to sell weapons around the world. There's an interesting thing here, though, that I probably wouldn't have known about if I wasn't like digging around these like CIA documents, is that there was another failed attempt to infiltrate and overthrow Hoxha in the 80s.
Okay. By
his National Liberation Army. Although the account of this is kind of strange in that, well, okay, I would not have known it happened at all if I didn't run across this document on the CIA's like declassified page from 1982 titled "Exiled Albanian King Upset Over Failed Coup." Which is, I guess, again, pretty mild way of putting it. Then, okay, Johannesburg, South Africa. Exiled King Leka of Albania was reported extremely upset Wednesday over a failed attempt by members of his National Liberation Army to overthrow the communist government of his native land. Albania announced Tuesday that it had, quote, liquidated an armed force of Albanian emigres who landed on its coast by boat Saturday night in a bid to topple the communist government in the tiny, isolated Balkan country. My husband told me he was extremely upset over the news, Queen Susan told UPI in Johannesburg, South Africa, where she and Leka live in exile.
This is awesome.
So, I mean, but then since it was a big disaster and they, you know, liquidated all of them.
Yeah.
Much like what happened in the 40s and 50s too.
So they were just doing like Bay of Pigs over and over again.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
I guess he didn't learn that it didn't work with his dad when they had like, you know, the CIA behind them and, you know, all that shit. I guess he figured, okay, there won't be like Soviet double agents this time. Maybe we'll have a chance. But also, I mean, Hoxha's regime is well known for building bunkers absolutely everywhere, especially on their long coastline, which if you ever go to Albania, you can see them on beaches and stuff. So, I mean, I guess that's maybe one of the few times that those bunkers served an actual purpose, which was to fucking kill, like liquidate these fucking dummies. Now Leka then deflects the blame from himself and said that he told them not to do it, and that it was this guy Jevdet Mustafa, who was some 45-year-old exile who lived in New Zealand, who commanded the operation and took it, did it on his own, kind of without approval, which kind of then makes you question his ability to command this National Liberation Army. I mean, seemingly, I guess, what's he doing? You know what I mean? You can just have, because I'd imagine it required a considerable amount of, I don't know, planning.
I mean, first of all, he's the king, and it's his army, and also he's like the wealthy guy, and who probably supplies all of the weapons and money. So I mean, for sure, it was his decision. I mean, not some guy from New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly. I should mention for good measure too, since we're talking about like all the different places that he went. He also he had set up training bases in Libya right before Gaddafi came to power.
Okay.
And then Gaddafi sent them packing too. So I'm like, I mean, really, from like Taiwan, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Egypt before Nasser, Franco is Spain, Rhodesia, South Africa. It's every possible. I mean, all he's missing here is like Pinochet in Chile and Paraguay or something.
So he never lived in like Latin America. Huh?
Not as far as I know, but I would 100% not be surprised if he went there and sold arms.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Like absolutely, for sure, 100%. So that fails. He stays in Albania throughout, in South Africa throughout the 80s, and in 1993, when the communist government in Albania collapses, he returns to Albania for the first time. And there's videos of it and stuff. He flies in on his private jet.
Is it very touching?
It is touching. Well, his guys, his entourage are doing the Zogist salute.
They have their own salute?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, King Zog had like, it's a kind of almost like fascist type salute where, right hand straight across the chest. So it's like the Zieg Heil when it's just the Zieg part, I guess.
Well, that's something like the Serbian Red Berets did something like this. I always thought it's like some French Legion stuff.
It might be. It probably is borrowed from the French Foreign Legion. Yeah. But that's considered the Zogist salute. They also had their own like symbols and stuff, which is like a Z that they wore on their hats and stuff, which I guess doesn't has a little different meaning today.
Yeah.
So he goes back to Albania in 93, proudly on his Royal Albanian passport that nobody recognizes, but then goes back to Albania again long term in 97 when Albania starts collapsing into the famous like pyramid schemes and when Albania basically descends into a kind of civil war, which he takes part in, right? So he brings a bunch of weapons and guys, and he has his like loyalists, I guess, from a lot of them are from his dad's home area of Albania, and he sets up his own kind of political party. This legalist party, which has, I guess, existed since then and existed in exile. I think the official legalist party was based in Switzerland. I think they also had
it's called the Legalist Party.
Yes.
Oh, Jesus.
Legalitet in Albanian. But that's like the monarchist party. It's their like political wing or whatever. It gets a little bit crazy for him in Albania then, as the country is slipping into this kind of civil war. His guys take part in like gun battles in Tirana. There's videos of it, like Associated Press videos of like, gunfire, gun battles between his guys and guys loyal to, I think, Sali Berisha. And it doesn't end well for him. And he gets
he try to take power or what?
Well, yes. But like tried to build a mass movement and also, gain power, which he failed at.
Yeah. So, like, even when Hoxha died, he was not, and he was in Albania, he was not able to take power.
He was not able to take power, no. And yeah, so he gets kicked out of Albania in 97, goes back to South Africa where they continue to live until 1999.
I mean, what a failure. You live your, like, decades, fantasizing about freeing Albania of communism and so on, and then the communist dictator dies, it's over for the communist regime, and you go there and they kick you out.
Yeah, you go there and you realize, they haven't just been waiting for the king to arrive again.
Yeah.
Okay, he got some supporters. Some say he had like tens of thousands of supporters. But again, I mean, that's not that great. And, for a guy that's been seemingly training his entire life for taking power, guerrilla warfare, arms dealing, Rhodesian Bush War, Mozambique, Thailand, Vietnam, wherever, to just go out like that.
Yeah. I bet he was extremely upset.
He was extremely upset. So he goes back to South Africa and, like I said, lives there till 99. And then in the royalist biography, it says that they get kicked out by the South African government that's pro-Milosevic. And that they get their asylum revoked. This is kind of a long time coming, honestly. I mean, it makes you wonder, how many other of those kinds of asylum seekers were still living in South Africa, years after apartheid ended. But yeah, I mean, he says, whatever, ANC rule was pro-Milosevic, in that as a result, they were exiled once again from their homeland, where his son was born in the 80s. And they pulled a Yugoslav monarchy style thing where the apartheid government agreed to make the hospital room temporarily Albanian territory so that the king could be born in Albania. Totally. This is what happened in London when...
when King...
the
Alexander,
Alexander
the Prince Alexander.
Prince Alexander,
the second or whatever, was born there.
So he then spends his time, I think, mostly in France again, and also kind of just bouncing around. I mean, he's got a lot of money; he can pretty much do whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah, he's always able to keep the gold and everything. Like, he moves so much, and there are these hostile governments, but they somehow just allow him to carry his bags of gold.
And weapons and whatever. I mean, I'd imagine that there are probably a lot of Swiss bank accounts, Cayman accounts, all kinds of things that extremely rich people have.
Yeah.
So he's in exile again until 2002, when the Albanian government formally invites them, the royal family, to come back to Albania. And from 2002 on, the whole royal family lived there. He dies in 2011. And had like a state funeral, flags at half staff, funeral attended by, all government officials and, religious figures and the like. So I guess that redeemed him in some ways of his failures.
Yeah. In the end, he kind of succeeded in something, at least to live in Albania.
Yeah. I gotta say though, I mentioned his like appearance, and it is really striking. So when he did come back to Albania in 93, apparently he was wearing his Rhodesian camo. People pointed that out. There's some good pictures of him with like an AK with this Rhodesian camo and this Albanian flag. But he spent a lot of time like giving interviews to Albanian TV. And I watched some of them because he is massive, and he kind of looks like, and dresses in this funny way, and he kind of looks like some weird like Albanian giant version of Edward Limonov. You know what I mean? Like without the glasses. And chain smokes constantly. In every single interview that I've seen with him, he's just like kind of rocking back and forth with a cigarette in his hand like the entire time. Even like one of them, like the reporter's like about to introduce him, the camera hasn't panned over to him yet, and you just see smoke like coming into the frame. And it pans over and he's like sitting in a leather chair, like again, like this British colonialist.
Yeah.
Like And like when it comes to like his friendship with, say, the foreign minister of Rhodesia, they were apparently like, hunting pals. So this is the kind of douchebag that like, went fucking big game hunting and, in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I mean, like shooting elephants and fucking whatever.
Yeah. That's all you need to know about him.
Oh, and one last fun fact about him, just when we're on the topic of elephants. This is, I guess, just a little side story. He apparently befriended Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California and gifted him a baby elephant, as a symbol of the GOP. And Nancy Reagan, I guess, didn't let him keep it or whatever.
Yeah. So I guess they donated it to some zoo or something.
I guess. Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. So yeah, that's the.
So his son is King Leka II or what?
Yeah, his son's King Leka II, and kind of like
he have
a lot
like
of
a wife, which is named like Queen Jennifer or something like this.
I'm not actually sure, but I mean he's basically a British guy.
Oh, okay.
Also went to Sandhurst, military academy or whatever, and is very much like all these other kind of a lot like the other Balkan monarchs in the sense that he's just some like fucking dude who was born in 1982 is now king of Albania, which is a position that means next to nothing.
Yeah.
Like Albania is not even a constitutional monarchy. It's like in Serbia too, like where they don't have any real official position, but they're just fucking rich guys who have this absurd title and go around doing like stupid ceremonial shit.
It's like LARPing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess that's all European monarchies are anymore, right?
Yeah, but some are actually kings and queens. These people are not just pretending to be.
I mean, like Zog, the Zog dynasty did have this suffer a reputation problem in European monarchies in that they didn't see them as like real royals because whatever. Even though in American press when they write about him, they're like. About the original King Zog, like a commoner who became king. And I was like, no, he's from a landowning family. He was like, that's not that big of a step.
No,
like, definitely wasn't like some fucking dude who proclaimed himself king. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. So yeah, that's old King Leka I.
Yeah, incredible character.
So, while Leka was making tons of money in globe-trotting and gunslinging, being an anti-communist warlord, most other Albanian exile groups were, let's say, not so extravagant. Since I don't have time, I think, to go into what happened to Bali Kombatar and Jafar Dev and all that stuff. Maybe we can talk about that later. I mean, there were a lot of Albanian exile groups. Bali Kombatar itself, the short story is that it kind of split after the 50s, after the disaster of trying to regain control of the country. It split into a bunch of different factions. In the U.S. alone, I think there were 3 that used that name. 2 in New York City, 1 in Boston. But more generally, there was, since I'm going to switch over to the US real quick, I'm going to talk about kind of the other side. So almost the exact opposite of like, a billionaire arms dealer monarch, and talk about a pretty obscure story. It's not very well known, I think, outside of Albanian circles. And again, I wouldn't really have known much about it unless I had been reading these CIA documents, because there's one from the 70s which breaks down every different Albanian nationalist group operating in the U.S. and gives like a short description of them. Very useful.
And this guy that you will talk about, he's also a right-winger.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's interesting because, with all of these anti-communist militant groups that, in the 90s, you had, in the late 90s, early 2000s, like an Albanian paramilitary that was very active, the Kosovo Liberation Army, and its various offshoots. But it was actually, started by groups that came out of like a Hodges nationalist movement.
Yeah, in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which is a completely different topic, but, you would think with all of these, right-wingers who are into paramilitaries, that they would be the ones who would start something like that. But actually, it was their enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this, the Albanian emigres in the U.S. specifically were almost all anti-communist. The CIA does mention something about some Albanians in the U.S. that they deem to be pro-communist for some reason or another. But by and large, they follow a trajectory very similar to a lot of these emigre groups in the U.S., where they eventually kind of switch to, lobbying, to adhering to American principles and this, that, and the other thing. And later on, I mean, this isn't a subject for now, but we will definitely talk about it at some point. They end up having very complicated relationships with the Kosovo Liberation Army until about 99, when they kind of all get behind them. But like a lot of the groups in the U.S. Were suspicious of them because of these like Hodges origins. Again, though, the Hodges stuff, does that really matter in the sense that like ultimately they come to embody this,
ethnic
pure
Albania.
nationalist.
They're like
ethnic
nationalist, but it's just funny that their origin is, the enemies of these people.
Oh, absolutely, and that's not lost to them. But it's the same problem that like the Serbian nationalists in the U.S. had with Milosevic, right? Is that some of them liked him, but he's like, but he's a communist. Is he a communist? Blah, blah, blah. Or, Croatian nationalists, they're like, well, Tudjman was also a communist at some point. Can we really trust him? Is he actually, an agent or, whatever. And there's a lot of that going on in the U.S. too. But I came across this relatively obscure group, a very obscure group. And there was one thing that caught my attention, and that's basically their connection with Ustashas. And so I started reading about it more. And then I just discovered this entirely fucking ridiculous side story. And so the group and person that I'm going to talk about today is the story of a guy named Ahmet Jarka and his group Albanian Unity. Now, Jarka is very different from, these well-established emigre guys that came from either, big existing groups or, served in various governments, whether it was the monarchist one or fascist collaborators, Nazis like Jafar Deva, whatever. He was just some fucking guy. Yeah. So he was born near the town of Plav in Montenegro. And after getting into some trouble with the Yugoslav authorities in the 1960s, he immigrates to the United States, settling in, of all places, the South Bronx in 1968, which was kind of a rough place to be in the 60s. But there was a growing number of working-class Albanian immigrants coming from Yugoslavia, since nobody could come from Albania anymore, really. A majority of Albanians that came to the U.S. After that initial wave of like CIA sponsored, collaborators and stuff that came over, the vast majority came from Yugoslavia, where they were, allowed to travel there and allowed to travel back depending on their political status or whatever. And they settled in the Bronx primarily because early Albanian migration in the U.S. tended to come from Albania and had like a pretty close connection to Italian-American communities. A vast majority of Albanians that came to the U.S., especially like in the early 20th century, were Orthodox Christians and Catholics. Muslims only coming like a lot later. I mean, there were some, but there weren't, significant numbers until really after World War II. So there's this kind of growing, working class Albanian community in the South Bronx as the as the Italians start leaving white flight in the 60s. They're basically getting replaced by Albanians coming in. And that's where, that's where Jarka comes. So, his group was interesting to me initially because I saw that he quote unquote, in the CIA report, cooperated with Croatians. And used the Croatian Center in Manhattan as their base. And I know that was like kind of an Ustasha stronghold. It was a community center associated with the Croatian Catholic Church in Manhattan. Like definitely not the Croatian Fraternal Union place. It's pretty much the exact opposite. It was like a stronghold of like, very right-wing nationalist emigres. And so, his group does meetings there, organizes.
What is the name of his group? Do you know?
Albanian Unity.
Yeah. Sorry, you said.
And so, they do the typical kind of stuff, propaganda within the Albanian community. They say they did propaganda also sending stuff to Yugoslavia or whatever, getting national sentiments invigorated. And then, of course, participating in the big protests against Tito's visits in the 70s, which is, I think we're going to have to do a whole episode just about those protests, because it's hilarious, because they were there, alongside Chetniks,
and the American Nazi Party.
The American Nazi Party, and all these fucking guys, right? So they're all,
Yeah, I wonder if they were all together or they had separate protests, or how did that go?
My understanding, well, so because Tito visited the U.S. a bunch of times. The first time, I think, the one in the 60s was pretty big, like 63 or something. And that was all of them together. Of course, Tito also toured in different places in the U.S. He didn't just go to D.C. or New York. Like, he also went to L.A., went to fucking Chicago, whatever. And so there were various different protests. I have a book about just, like, the Serbs organizing their anti-Tito protests. So they did that. And, that's pretty standard stuff so far. So why is this guy hailed as a hero in nationalist emigre circles?
I bet it's something very heroic. Yeah.
Yes, he killed his boss. Now, normally I'd be like, salute. All right, whatever. But no, he was the proud defender of the flag and Albanian honor. Now, a quick side note, there's something very specific and unique, I think, in Albanian nationalism about their cult of the flag.
Yeah, it's like straight up like fetishism.
Like, to a major degree. I mean, the Flag Day for them is like a very big thing. Defending the honor of the flag is important. People give their kids the first name Flag. It's I've met people with that name. Like, it's
what is the name?
Not Flamur.
Okay.
Like, it's a name that people can have. So I mean, it's a very well developed thing. So, why did he shoot his boss? So, like I said, like most working class Albanian immigrants in New York at the time, he worked a bunch of fucking shitty jobs. He lived in the fucking Bronx. And at his job, he kept a proud little altar to the fatherland.
Of course.
So it's not clear to me whether this was his locker or some sort of like desk work area. He had, but whatever it was, he had, his Albanian flag and a portrait of Skanderbeg, and I think some like, piece of poetry or something, Albanian poetry. And, he was very proud of this, as you might imagine, from a guy who, has a nationalist emigre group that works with Ustashas. So he gets in a fight with his boss. At some point during this fight, his boss, an argument rather, his boss rips down his Albanian flag and either tears it up or steps on it. Either way, he defiles the flag.
Sure.
Now, I should mention here that in Albanian media, the boss is always referred to as a Russian guy, which I guess is significant. Like, I've seen them, describe, there's a pejorative term that they use for Slavs and, whatever. There's like a Russian, although in other like Albanian nationalist newspapers, they say his name is Mr. Smith. So
yeah,
your guess is as good as mine. And maybe it was like third generation, or who the fuck knows. Yeah. Either way, he comes back to work, and confronts Mr. Smith
Mm-hmm.
and tells him, I have come, Mr. Smith, to carry out the will of my people, to protect the honor and the flag raped by you. Ahmed Jarka then produces a pistol and shoots his boss 6 times.
That was the will of the Albanian people.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, in this newspaper translation of it, it says, shot 6 bullets into the forehead and chest of that arrogant violator of the Albanian national flag. He then went out into the street, smoked his last cigarette as a free man, and turned himself in to the police.
Wow.
Now, apparently during his interrogation, I think his English still was not particularly good. I should mention this. Did I say it was in 1975? So he hadn't been in the U.S. for that long.
Okay.
I mean, a while, but, whatever. Apparently he was like rocking back and forth and just, according to the detective, repeating soldier, fatherland, order, flag.
Okay.
And, going on about how he's a true soldier of his homeland to protect the national flag,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah.
Red and black, I dress eagle on my chest, guts a bit in Albania.
Needless to say, he goes to prison. However, at his trial, a bunch of Albanian nationalists show up, waving flags, holding, banners that, say, immediate release for the defender of national honor, long live flag. We love flag. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. It's absurd. And since there's not, much outside of Albanian nationalist writings about this, they say that he got out of prison early because the judge and jury were sympathetic to his defending the honor of the flag, and that I guess he, was an exemplary inmate.
How long was he in prison?
I'm not exactly sure. Doesn't seem like it was that long.
Okay.
It wasn't. He didn't get 25 to life.
So the flag argument actually worked.
Maybe, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's New York in the 70s. I don't know. So he gets, he eventually gets out of prison, is, lauded as a hero in emigre circles. And then, according to some accounts, goes to Kosovo in the 90s and does, in one article, it literally said, I think, things that we will discuss later or something. And I think the reluctance to discuss what he might be doing is that his son became a major figure in Albanian American politics, but also kind of in American politics in general.
Oh,
so this is, I want to say real quick that I'm not I'm not implying children are responsible for the sins of their parents or whatever. I wouldn't probably mention it at all if, well, okay, we'll see why. So, his son, he had, I think, 6 children in the U.S. And his son, Ilir, kind of crawled his way out of the South Bronx poverty. He talks a lot about how he was around for the early days of hip hop. He was a break dancer living in the Bronx, doing graffiti, that kind of thing. And then, eventually goes to Cornell University, finishes, all the good schools in America, kind of, typical, hardworking immigrant story, right? Yeah. And goes on to work for the State Department and then, becomes a Democratic insider.
Oh.
So he worked on the Bush and Gore campaign, did various different kind of Democratic Party stuff and government jobs of various kinds, and goes on to found and lead one of the major later Albanian emigre organizations, it's NAAC, the National Albanian American Council, and is a guy that was like I said, an aide to congressmen, accompanied the American delegation to like the Rambouillet agreements, met Milosevic with an Albanian delegation. Now, this is maybe too much information that, like, you know, his group was kind of following the very legalist line in that, you know, this guy worked for the U.S. government. It was very much like, you know, lobbying the U.S. government on behalf of Albanian interests and stuff like that. There was another kind of more radical kind of later emigre organization too that was like more explicitly like we need to help the KLA and all this stuff. But I mean, he was very important in rallying like congressional support for Albanian causes. And again, you know, sure, you could say, you know, well, he did things the legal way.
He definitely progressed, like in the tactics that he applied for nationalist politics compared to his father.
Yes. But like, you know, very much was his, you know, kind of father's son in that way. And that like he carried on the like Albanian nationalist tradition. Now, again, I wouldn't mention this like, you know, maybe he, you know, feels that like his father, you know, maybe took some, you know, maybe shouldn't have killed a guy for disrespecting the flag or something like that. But no, he's there. His dad is still a hero and like lauded by his own organization, which he's no longer chairman of, but like, you know, has like an advisory position or whatever. Still works in kind of the nonprofit sector, NGO, like lobbyist kind of positions. So Žarka dies, the elder Žarka, Ahmed Žarka dies, you know, I think 2011, something like that, 10, 11, and is still celebrated to this day. So an article from the Bronx Times from February 24th, 2017, Bronx commemorates Kosovo's 9th year of independence. Assemblyman Mark Jonai and Bronx's Albanian community celebrated the 9th anniversary of Kosovo's independence, blah, blah, blah. The cultural celebration honored Freedom Award recipient Ambassador William Walker, who led the Kosovo verification mission, and posthumous Patriot Award recipients Ahmed Žarka, Gjergj Kalla, and Shaban John Balja.
Yeah.
So, no. This guy hasn't been forgotten about. In 2017, he's being, you know, awarded the Patriot Award by, you know, a major Albanian American organization that's at an event that's attended by, you know, an assemblyman of New York, ministers from Kosovo, you know, his son, who
well, I mean, he's a patriot.
The award on his father's behalf. And like I said, this guy, from what I can tell, other than just doing pretty much standard run-of-the-mill, like emigre nationalist stuff, is famous for just killing a guy who disrespected the Albanian flag.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, this is a kind of like bizarre psychopathic mentality that you see in like these nationalist circles and groups.
He defended the honor of the Albanian nation and suffered for it. Or
it's bizarre.
You can say he was a total maniac. You know?
Yeah, and so, you know, whatever. I mean, this fucking shithead is some sort of hero.
Yeah,
I mean, it's...
Well, I guess when you adopt this kind of politics, I guess then he is. I mean, you cannot deny that he's a patriot. I mean, he's a total maniac and psycho, but, I mean, he did suffer for the honor of the nation.
Yeah. And, you know, his son said that, like, you know, he fulfilled, like, his dad's dream of, you know, liberating Kosovo or whatever.
Yeah.
So, you know, there you go. It's, you know, it's always interesting to me, and we'll see this in some stuff that we're going to talk about later on in this arc, but it's really fascinating to me how the children of, like, nationalist emigres, you know, some of whom are, like, war criminals, or this guy's just, like, just a murderer.
Yeah.
How they talk about, like, their families.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because and this is a consistent thing. I've seen it with a couple Ustasha guys that we're going to talk about. Like, some of them were some of whom had, like, extreme war criminal parents, like genocidaires.
Mm-hmm.
And, in interviews with them in the U.S., they're always like, my father was a great anti-communist fighter. He believed really strongly in the independence of our people.
Yes, very strongly. Yeah.
Kind of neglects to mention all this other stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I mean, at some point, I'm sure there is some sort of rationalization that happens in people's heads about like trying to come to terms with like the crimes of their parents. But like in this case, it's like interesting because, this guy's like a Democratic Party insider, right? So it's one of these like great examples of like nationalist diaspora kids who have like, liberal politics at home.
Oh yeah.
And then are just like complete off the wall lunatic nationalists when it comes to like the place of their parents' origin.
Yes.
And this is a shining example of that.
Yeah.
Because this guy's like, yeah, I'm a break dancer, grew up in the Bronx, like, blah blah blah. I'm like a tough white kid from the Bronx, like got my education, I'm giving back to the community, I'm like a liberal, all this other shit. And then, so I'll receive this posthumous award given by the organization that I founded for my dad who shot a guy over the flag.
Yeah.
And, who like worked with Ustashas or whatever. And like, we'll see the same thing with like some major figures in the Croatian American and Bosnian American communities too. You just completely like ignore that stuff. It would be like, or we'll have pretty liberal positions in the US and just be like, your dad was a Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah, quite a common thing, actually. Well, I mean, this is like, we talked about two very inspirational figures today. Yeah, very, I mean, no? It's quite
two very different ends of the spectrum there when it comes to like Albanian nationalist emigres.
Yeah, but in the end, they are somehow positive stories, They fought and for the stuff they believed in, and in the end, I guess they won somehow.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, really, for real.
Yeah.
I mean, fucking hell.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. There's much more we can do on the wild, wacky adventures of Albanian nationalist emigres.
Oh, yeah, we definitely should do that. Yeah,
we definitely should. I didn't even mention a bunch of these groups and some of their activities and stuff. So, I went into this episode originally when we were planning like what we were going to schedule. I was like, oh yeah, I read 2 books on Jafar Deva. I can do something on Jafar Deva. And then I was like, because I think even Arc 2, I mentioned the whole Rhodesia thing. And it's been a thing that I've been wanting to talk about forever because it's fucking so off the wall.
Yeah. I mean, I bet there is like more interesting stuff there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just might need some help for somebody to like dig around more Albanian language sources. Because that's where, like, dude, there's nothing about this like Žarka dude. Even in like some interviews that his son does with like Albanian nationalist papers in the US and stuff, he's like giving an interview about his meeting with Milosevic and stuff like that, and the guy's like, did Milosevic know who your dad was? He's like, no, he didn't. I don't think he did. And then like somewhere later, I think in like parentheses, like his dad was a major national hero who defended the honor of the flag. And so like it's the stuff that's written about that is mostly in Albanian from what I can see. I haven't seen almost anything in English about that dude. So yeah, that's your Tenapod exclusive, I guess.
Very good.
All right, cool. Well, we'll be back. Fritz will be back, I guess, for our next free ep now, and we should be right back on schedule.
Yeah, we are going back to the Serbian guys.
Yes. Oh, now we're going to get into some of the stuff that I've been really excited about.
Yeah, there'll be fun stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, see you Monday.